Caffeine and Crime and to season 7 of Caffeine and Crime. I, for one, cannot believe I've made it 7 seasons at this point. That is pretty insane to me. But I have really enjoyed the ride, and I feel like at this point, I just strive to do better each season. So hopefully you guys feel that, or, you know, see that, I guess, is what I'm getting at. The quality of everything. And with that, this is the first season that is going to be back on YouTube. And since this is the first episode of season 7, we're gonna deep dive for a minute. Because I started this podcast a long time ago, and YouTube, I'm calling you out. I am trying this again. I used to upload every episode to YouTube, and the first season really took it out of me. I really wanted to be, you know, face to face with you, because some people don't listen to podcasts as much as they want to see your face and, you know, have your face with the voice. And that's what I always wanted to do starting this podcast, but I tried it and it was just a hot mess. Been slowly trying to upload past seasons, and it's been a fail, honestly, because there's no footage of me sitting down and talking, so I've just been having to edit together pieces as much as I can, and it just takes me 10 times longer to edit those. So I'm still going to slowly try to add them here and there and be extra videos for you guys, but I will be uploading the current season on YouTube. I'm hoping for Wednesdays, so that it's just a day after the podcast goes up, like on podcast platforms. So if you are just listening on podcast platforms, my episodes will be going up on Tuesdays still. That is the plan anyways. I will also still have my blogs. I want to throw that out there for people who listen to my podcast on their way to work or whenever they're trying to get stuff done, but maybe they do want to check out and see like the visuals as far as pictures and, you know, stuff like that, that links to the cases. You can still check out the blog, and I'll still always upload them there for you in case you're not able to watch them on YouTube. But if you want the full visual effect on YouTube, I will be doing that face to face. I'm going to be throwing some pictures up on the screen. But yeah, trying to chit chat with both platforms at the same time and actually be a full-on podcaster. I'm really excited about this though, and I'm glad to be back, but just like in the past, I'm going to keep comments off of YouTube. I want to stay a safe place, and I want to just be a community that I'm able to entertain you guys and also spread awareness on some cases, especially the ones that we're going to tackle this season. And by doing that, I don't want this to be a toxic place. But if you're a true one and you want to, you know, contact me, or you want to say anything about the cases in a positive light, people, let's keep this like friendly for everybody. You can definitely check out my Instagram. I have one dedicated for this podcast. It is Caffeine Crime Podcast on Instagram. So yeah, usually post whenever an episode goes up, so you can check that post out and comment on it, so we can kind of, you know, chit chat there. But a lot of people like to just stay more private or anonymous, so they will just message me and we can talk about the case in messages. So yeah, if one of those works for you, great. I'm sorry if you're upset about the comments being turned off, but yeah, I just want this to be a friendly, non-toxic, safe place for everybody as a whole. Back on YouTube, I'm excited about it, and wanted to share it with people who maybe have missed it and have been listening to my podcast, so that you can jump over. But for the majority of this season, I promise there won't be this long of intros. So season 7 is here, and I am really excited about it, but this is probably going to be one of the most challenging seasons I have done, because we're going to be talking about a lot of cold cases. Cold cases are something that have always really struck me, and I just always feel just this sense of like emptiness after I've, you know, done research or watched a docu-series or something like that on a cold case. It's just always gut-wrenching to know that like the killer is still out there, or that people have to bury their loved ones without knowing what happened to them, or why this happened, how this happened. I mean, I know that goes through everybody's mind with any type of murder case, but there's even some who don't get the closure, as in they don't even find the remains. And is it like, you know, my loved one is missing, or is my loved one like actually dead? Some people don't ever even get that closure. So they are definitely gut-wrenching, and I know this season's going to be really hard to get through. So I hope that you bear with me through it. I feel like I'm going to get a little glum towards the end of the season, probably by then really wanting to just be able to wrap it up and be like, I got to stray away from cold cases for a little bit. Cases in general are always so draining and sad to begin with, but whenever you factor in cold cases, it just makes it that much more worse, knowing that there's no closure, nobody's caught, and it's honestly frightening too, especially if it's a case from your area. It could be your neighbor that committed this crime and was just never caught. It's just insane. So to start the season off, I thought I would do a case that is very, very infamous, and I feel like any type of true crime podcast, YouTuber, blogger does not miss this one. This one is always talked about. So I did want to talk about it, but this season I will have other cases that maybe are not as well known, because I do want to spread more of the awareness. There is still missing people. There's so many missing people, and it's just so devastating for the families. I can't imagine. I can't imagine one of my children just going missing and never seeing them again, never knowing what happened or if they're still alive. Like, it's mind-boggling to me. So although this case is definitely still very, very important, something, you know, tragic happened and shouldn't have happened, but I do feel like cases like this are very well talked about. Everybody knows this case. Everybody knows the gist of it, and I definitely want to use this platform as a way to spread awareness on cases that are even more recent. With every case, there's so many people around. In a lot of these situations, somebody had to have seen something, and to spread that and just to get it out there, you know, could save somebody or give closure to a family. Today, we're talking about the Black Dahlia. On a bright early morning in January, it was January 15th, 1947 to be exact, a mother was taking her child for a walk, and it was just like any other day. They actually took this walk quite a bit in a Los Angeles neighborhood, and she stumbled across a very gruesome sight. It was a type of situation where she was a little further back. She may have even been like across the street. But from what she could see, it was the body of a naked woman sliced in half at the waist. The body was just a few feet by the sidewalk, and it was posed in a way that she actually thought it was just a mannequin that somebody had just thrown there. It was also super pale, so that also made her think that it was just a mannequin as well. The sight was still enough for her to freak out, not want to take her young child closer, and she actually went to the nearest home to make the phone call to the police. Besides the obvious that this woman was literally cut in half a couple inches above the belly button, there were cuts all over the body. There wasn't a single drop of blood on the crime scene. It indicated that she was killed prior in a different location and was moved to this location. The investigation was led by the LA Police Department. The FBI was asked to help, and it quickly identified the body in literally 56 minutes, which I actually found to just be super crazy that, you know, in such a big place. I mean, I get like this was like a, you know, like a smaller neighborhood, but in such a big place as Los Angeles and, you know, that area, population-wise and stuff too. I mean, this is 1947, I found that to be really crazy, that the body was identified in 56 minutes. It's crazy to think of what type of technology the FBI even had in the 40s. But that's how they found out who this was, with a blurred fingerprint via sound photo. It was a fax machine used by news services from Los Angeles. And the young woman turned out to be 22-year-old Hollywood hopeful named Elizabeth Short. Elizabeth Short was born July 29th, 1924 in Hyde Park, Massachusetts. Her parents, Cleo and Phoebe Short, had 5 daughters, with Elizabeth being the third born. They were the type of family that they moved around quite a bit, but they eventually settled in Medford, Massachusetts. Cleo built mini golf courses for a living, and Phoebe stayed home as a stay-at-home mom. Everything was going okay for this family until the stock market crashed in 1929. The family really struggled. Cleo lost everything, even all of his savings. And the following year, the family car was found near a bridge. And sadly, the police figured that it was a suicide and that Cleo took his life jumping off of the bridge. But a body was never found. Phoebe was now a widow mom of 5 children. I mean, they signed the death certificate, they had the funeral, everything. She was forced to move into a tiny apartment with her 5 daughters in Medford. She started working as a bookkeeper to afford to live at this point. Elizabeth was known to be a beautiful woman. She was a beautiful girl who grew up to be a beautiful woman, with dark black hair and piercing light green eyes. She normally would have a flower in her hair too. Elizabeth had really bad asthma as a kid. At one point, had such a bad case of bronchitis that she had to undergo respiratory surgery at the age of 15. The doctors recommended her to actually leave Massachusetts during the winter month when, you know, all those respiratory infections like RSV and all that type of ordeal is going around. They recommended that she would leave and go stay with family in Miami, Florida during the winter, and then come back to Massachusetts in the spring and summer. She did this for a few years, and she dropped out of high school around her sophomore year. And by this time, it had been 12 years since the incident with her father. But her mother, Phoebe, received a letter in the mail. It was not what she was thinking. It was a letter from her quote-unquote dead husband. He apologized for faking his death and moving to California to start over. Cleo moved to Vallejo, California. All the pressures of losing all of his savings and the realization that he had a wife, himself, and 5 children to take care of was way too much for him. So he drove his car to the bridge, faked his death, and moved to California to start over with what little he had left. And the shittiest person in the world award goes to, at the age of 18, Elizabeth liked to have fun, and she was known at the time as a wild child. And this caused her to move to California, where her father was at. Once she had news that he was alive, I think she kind of wanted to venture out and kind of rekindle that friendship. And you got to think about it. If she's a teenager and she's living with her mom and she's known as like a wild child, her mom's probably nagging at her a lot and, you know, really trying to look out for her, but she's probably getting sick and tired of that. And this is also coming from a Hollywood hopeful. So, you know, she wants to go out to California. And her father had a relationship. They had, I guess, started talking on the phone and receiving letters back and forth. So she wanted a change, and it just so worked out that she could go and live with her father. He worked at the Navy Yards and told her that she could stay with him, and he actually gave her $800 in advance for her to be able to move herself from Massachusetts to California to stay with him. Let her get all settled, and he told her that to make things work, you know, she could stay with him for as long as she wanted to, but he needed her to help out around the house, to cook dinner, and I mean, you guys get the gist around this time. It's the women jobs. You get to live here for free, although it's kind of just like, okay, it's your daughter, you faked your death, and she hasn't been with you in years. Either way, she was super excited to be in California. It was somewhere where she could go for her dreams of being a Hollywood actress. Unfortunately, her stay with her father only lasted a few weeks. When she got there, she kind of realized, all right, this is a little much. And I probably felt to her like it wasn't that much different from her mom's, as well as just going from there and trying to help out to then moving to California with her dad and feeling like she has like the same things of keeping the house clean and cooking. And yeah, she just wasn't really having it. And she would actually go out and, live life as a teenager. And she was 18, so she liked to just go out and have fun, but she would be out like hours and hours into the night, and her father would, I'm sure, kind of worry a little bit with it being such a big place and her used to just being at a small town. It was quite the shift, but I think he was also getting irritated because the fact that he would come home with no cooked dinner and probably a messy house, and he ended up just telling her, this isn't going to work out, you got to get out. She ended up landing a job at Camp Cook on the military yard as she refused to go back to Massachusetts. She wanted to figure out a way to make things work in California. She worked at a post exchange selling food, clothes, and that type of ordeal at the military yard. She stayed steady here for 9 months or so before moving to San Diego. But during that time, she had been arrested by the Santa Barbara police for underage drinking. This is where the mugshot that we always see comes into play. Even after her death, when they're asking people, like, have you seen this lady recently? Do you know her whereabouts or where she's been the last few days? They literally, like, just splashed her mugshot everywhere. She's a beautiful girl, though, so even her mugshot is just, like, stunning. Police actually advised her that she should just move back to Massachusetts. They said, you're a little wild and, you've been getting into a lot of trouble around here. I think they maybe have been giving her some warnings, and then she was caught underage drinking. So that was just kind of like the final straw. Like, we're not going to keep you here, but you do need to probably, best advice if you go back home. While she did take them up on this offer of getting away and taking a break, she was like, hell no, I'm not going back to Massachusetts. So she went back to the family that she has in Miami, Florida, and stayed with them for a bit. In Miami, she had a relationship with a man named Matt. He was training for deployment, and soon after he was deployed, he was involved in a plane crash and was hospitalized. And while in recovery in a hospital in Indiana, he wrote often to Elizabeth, and at one point he even proposed to her in his letter. She was so excited and said yes, and soon after his recovery, he was deployed once again. This is just mind-blowing to me, but was in another plane crash. That's crazy. It was on August 10th, 1945, and sadly, he did not survive this one. She was, of course, heartbroken, and she, I think, just kind of needed to get away. Like, that was just like, all right, I've had my fill of this area. I think it was just so tragic losing him, and, like, that was her person in Miami, that she needed to get away, and to do that, she moved back to California. And in July of 1946, she was back in California and staying with a friend, Joseph, who she had met at a military base in Florida. He was stationed in Long Beach, California now, so she stayed at Long Beach for a bit. Without a job, a place to live, but with a dream. Around this time, she meets her friend Dorothy, who worked at an all-night theater. The two became quick friends, and upon hearing that Elizabeth didn't have a place to stay, Dorothy offered her a place at her house, and she worked on as a waitress at the same night theater. Elizabeth stayed for a couple of months in December 1946 to early 1947 because she didn't want to impose on Dorothy. She told Dorothy she had a new place and that someone named Red was coming to pick her up. And Dorothy said her goodbyes and watched her get into a Studebaker coupe in the front of her house. That was the last time that Dorothy saw Elizabeth. On January 9th, 1947, Elizabeth returned to LA from San Diego from a trip with Red. Dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel, which is one of the last known places of eyewitnesses that seen her. And that is the Biltmore Hotel, downtown LA. She went there to meet her sister, reportedly, for lunch. And some of the staff remember seeing her there in the lobby, but some of them say that they never did see her. So it's kind of always just been was she actually there? We don't really know. Apparently somebody seen her make a phone call, and then she was gone. And later that evening, she was spotted a few blocks away at the Crown Grill and Cocktail Spot. It was her last known location alive. On January 15th, 1947, police got the call from the woman who was walking down the road with her baby. This was around 10 a.m. The whole case was insane and just sick. It was right in the suburb area, not far away from the sidewalk. I mean, anybody could see this just walking by. I mean, a lady walking with her 3-year-old daughter seen this. If the highly active location wasn't enough, the way the body was positioned and state of it was just absolutely disgusting. What people are capable of, I will never understand. South Norton Avenue was a street that at this time, it was a lot more emptier. It's much more filled up with houses and like actual full suburb now. But it was still a suburb then, and houses were being built. The body was sliced right in half and posed. Her right breast was cut off, and each of her big toes were painted bright red with nail polish. There was cuts on her face, crisscross cuts on her pubic area, and on her hip, there was a game of tic-tac-toe sliced into her skin. She also had a joker cut on both sides of her mouth to make it look like she was smiling, which it's so eerie. The bruising on her showed that she had been tied up at one point. There wasn't a drop of blood on the scene, which led them to realize that this was known as a quote-unquote dump site. The crime took place elsewhere. Her body was laid here to be found. They wanted her to be found. And due to the darkening of the skin, they were able to determine that at one point she was face down after her death. This was caused by the pooling of blood after death, which apparently was drained. The no blood, they already had clues that wasn't the actual crime scene. But this also is a big way that confirms if bodies have been moved from crimes or post-crime scenes. So either way, they would have known that the body had been moved from the actual crime scene. So with no leads besides a shoe that was found nearby, and it was confirmed by a friend of Elizabeth's to be hers, they contacted the 911 caller because that's kind of the only lead that they had of somebody that they could talk to that could maybe tell them if something suspicious was going on in the area or if she's seen anybody else. So they called Mrs. Bersinger. At the time, it took weeks to track her down. She said that she was taking a walk like she normally did with her 3-year-old daughter. They were going to the shoe store. Decided to walk there. It was a nice day outside. And again, it's something that she would do often with her daughter. She explained that she thought it was a fake body, like it was a mannequin because it was so pale. And so she just went across the street to call 911. She then said she didn't go back because she didn't want her daughter to see, and there was just no other information that she could really give them. With those fingerprints, they were able to confirm that it was Elizabeth Short. So they went out to Vallejo to tell the news to Cleo, her father. And in a situation like this, I mean, is there any worse news out there than that a loved one has been murdered or a loved one has died in general, but a child, your child, like you're supposed to outlive your children. For me, that would be the worst possible news I think I could ever get. But to Cleo Short, it was not. He answered the door drunk and angry, saying that, and I quote, "I don't give a rat's ass." He didn't even want to go to the coroner's office to ID the body. Her mother was contacted next, and she took the next flight possible to California. A reporter had actually broke the news to Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe. He called her and told her Elizabeth won a beauty contest and to get more and just to really dig and get information about her daughter, Elizabeth. And after they got everything they wanted, they said, "Oh, well, we're actually not hosting a beauty contest. We just wanted information. Your daughter's actually been murdered. I don't think there's a more awful way to find out that your daughter has been murdered than that. So by the time the police contacted her, she already knew the news and was, I'm sure, like many, devastated, but took the next flight to California because she was actually a parent that cared. The police went to her friend Dorothy next for info, and they asked her if she had any idea where Elizabeth's recent whereabouts were, and she told them the whole story about Red picking her up, this so-called Red man. With the name Red and the car model, they started looking into it. They looked into hotels in all the surrounding areas, and they got a motel of Pacifico Beach where there was a record of a man named Robert Monley, and he had the same car, make, and model. That and the fact that he checked into this motel the days that are in question was kind of like, that's a hit. That is our next lead. Sidebar for Robert Monley, he is a 25-year-old married man that she was spending time with in San Diego. Not very classy, Robert. With the name of the suspect, they were able to find a photo of him and later have Dorothy confirm that in fact was the man that was going by the name Red and who had picked up Elizabeth from Dorothy's house. So they do a background check on him. They want to know more info about this guy. Even then, there was that barrier there where you can't just take somebody in and arrest them on nothing. And if you do that and then you don't have hard evidence, you can't keep them there. So there's kind of that going on where they want to do the background check. They want to look around and see more about this guy before they bring him in. He was from South Beach, California, married and worked as a cell engineer. But 2 days before the murder, he had left for San Francisco with a friend named Harry. They find where this Harry lives and stop in to see if Robert is there. But no one is home. What they do find, though, is Robert's car, the same make and model of the car that picked up Elizabeth at Dorothy's house the night of question, in this man Harry's garage. So I know we're bouncing around a lot. There's a lot of names. But the police decide that they're going to just post up here and just wait for Harry or Robert to come. And at this point in time, they think that these two had something to do with what happened to Elizabeth Short. They wait for 2 days for these men to show up. And on January 19th, they show up and are taken straight into custody. They are questioned, the car is searched, and Robert goes through 2 polygraph tests. He passes both of them with flying colors and is released with nothing to hold him on, and police were pretty much just like, this guy is clear. This is when everything really started spiking with the media. The media was finding out more and more details about this case and the fact that nobody at all had been or was being held for this murder. So it's like, is there a murderer out on the loose? I mean, this is a suburb. There is a lot of people around this area. There's a lot of women who are walking the streets with their babies. The media was saying things such as, this was a young woman who was only 22 years old and was a Hollywood hopeful named Elizabeth Short. She was given the name Black Dahlia by the press for her rumored penchant for sheer black clothes and hair, and for the Blue Dahlia movie out at that time. Another month goes by and there's no other suspects. You can imagine how scared, the community is. The media is going crazy with it, so everybody is just very cautious leaving their homes. Even though there was a few that came forward saying that they had killed her, what else is new? I feel like with every case, you get that type of behavior. You have people coming forward and saying that I'm responsible because they want some media coverage time. There was no concrete evidence with any of them being the actual suspect. In support of LA police, the FBI ran record checks on potential suspects and conducted interviews across the nation. Now, this is what has been said about the case, but ultimately we see that there really wasn't any other suspects at that time. I think they were just trying to go through any body in the area. Also look at certain cases. I think this is where they're going to look at sex offenders. They're going to, you know, look at anything like that to kind of see who's in that area and what are they capable of. But I think that this is also trying to link it with anything else. Like, is there more crimes going on somewhere else that's nearby that it could be linked to this? So I think that's kind of like the background searches that they were possibly doing at this time, because there wasn't really any potential suspects besides the ones that I have mentioned already this far into the game that they knew of. Based on earlier suspicions, though, that the murderer may have had skills in dissection because of the body, and it was very cleanly cut. The agents were also asked to check out a group of students at the University of Southern California Medical School. And in a tantalizing potential break in the case, the Bureau searched for a match to fingerprints found on an anonymous letter. It may have been sent to authorities by the killer, but the prints weren't in FBI files. Just like the Zodiac killer, we kind of have this letter of them trying to interfere with the police and pretty much try to belittle them a little bit. On saying like, haha, you haven't gotten me. So they actually sent in letters addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner, just like the Zodiac did. And so it's kind of like that little repeat copycat moment there. And thankfully, the letter was stopped before it got to the Examiner, and it was screened and sent straight to the police station. The evidence that held with this particular letter were so solid because with the letter, this individual also sent personal belongings of Elizabeth Short. This is where it got a little scary because it's just like, oh, this is actually the person. It had her address book that she always had with her. There were pages ripped out that could have had info of her killer. Was it somebody that she knew? And their information was on that page. That could have been the biggest clue this perpetrator gave them. Her birth certificate was also included. The letter was word cuts out of magazines, so kind of like that little Mod Podge thing that you see in movies and shows where they pretty much do like a scrapbook page of cutting out letters and stuff from magazines, so that it's not all handwritten. And in that scrapbook page of letters is said, and I quote, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. The outside envelope was wiped clean with the same cleaner that her body had been cleaned with." Because there was no fingerprints on her body. The address book had the name Mark Hansen on it. He was a wealthy nightclub owner, and she would stay with him from time to time. He became a suspect when her roommate told police he tried to get handsy with her and she turned him down, and it happened very recently. So they finally have another suspect. He was then cleared with a very strong alibi of, I'm pretty sure he wasn't even in the state at the time. Another letter was received, and it said, and I quote, "Here it is, turning myself in Wednesday, January 29th at 10 a.m. Had fun at police. Signed, the Black Dahlia Avenger." 2 men around this time were also arrested. A man named Dan, and once again, Robert. It always comes back to Robert, or as we also know him, Red. They couldn't go anywhere with Robert, so they had to eventually just let him go again. But with Dan, he confessed to it, but later said that he was mentally unwell, didn't actually do it. At this point, you can imagine how pissed the police are. Like, they're really, really pouring themselves into this, trying to figure out who did this just awful, awful case. And to have somebody say, yeah, I did it, admit to all of it, it's starting to all add up, and then be like, oh, I was mentally unstable. I don't know why I said that, but I didn't do it. I'd be so damn frustrated. Then let's insert George Hodel into this whole scene. Hollywood doctor for celebrities. Friends of his recognized Elizabeth in the papers, and they actually called in a little tip and said, hey, you may want to check out George. because he kind of dated her briefly. And I mean, everything going on with this case, I mean, the fact that they were actually looking at medical school students, and then it's like there's this celebrity doctor, a surgeon that may have briefly dated her. I mean, red flags. Though it was never official, people remembered her at his house and with him for parties. So I guess in terms they were maybe talking or just kind of having a casual fling, friends with benefits maybe, but it was just kind of like she was just at the parties and stuff, you know, she liked to have fun. But what they also had to consider was this doctor also had a very, very shady past. Even if this guy didn't commit this, didn't do this crime, it's just one more person in this whole scenario that is just downright just disgusting. Because of his past, it was enough for the police to be suspicious of him. You see, he was accused of, like, allegedly, he assaulted her, his 14-year-old daughter, who then became pregnant. And he then attempted to perform an abortion on her at this time, that was unsuccessful. And the baby was then put up for adoption right away. There's an actual trial and everything on this that I don't even want to get into. It makes me sick to my stomach. But in the end, he got off. He was a strong suspect for this case with Elizabeth Short, knowing how rich he was and that he would lawyer up if the police actually had him in for, you know, questioning. Instead, they decided to do something else. And that was bug his house. They put different listening devices in his house and on his phone. They were listening in on him discreetly for a very long time. On February 18th, 1950, they actually heard a woman scream around 8 p.m. And it actually happened twice. Had been listening in on him for weeks and had had nothing. So hearing a woman scream twice, and the fact that this day they heard absolutely nothing all day long. It was very quiet. What little they did hear was him talking or him having conversation with other men, but they did not hear a woman all day until 8 p.m. when they heard the two screams, and it was enough for them to send somebody straight over. LAPD went straight to the house to check things out, but nothing was ever found, and they didn't really have anything to push because they can't just be like, well, we've bugged your house, we heard her scream. Later on, while they still have somebody listening in and in charge of this bugged house situation, they hear a phone conversation that's a little sketchy. He's telling someone that he is placing a pillow and a blanket over a woman. And then he said, and I quote, "Suppose I killed the Black Dahlia. They have nothing on me. If they try to question my secretary, they can't because she's dead now." This took place in the same conversation as "I put a pillow and a blanket over her head." His secretary had just recently died from an overdose, which is kind of weird since he's a doctor and all, and he could, you know, prescribe things that would look kind of like an overdose. Easily be able to overdose somebody who he really wanted to. Probably be easy for him to know exactly what they would look for to make sure it looked like an overdose as well. It's all a little fishy, but this is all allegedly. So who killed the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short, and why? It's still a mystery, and that is the first cold case of this season. The murderer has never been found, and given how much time has passed, probably never will be. But the legend grows, let me tell you. People want to know, was George paying off police? It's a rumor that was happening, and the fact that they had enough to charge him with the murder sometime in 1950. And George, if you don't remember, is the doctor who I was just talking about. They had enough to charge him with for this murder sometime in 1950, but he had fled the country. They literally went to his house to arrest him, and he had fled the fucking country. I think we all know who did this, right? He had a son named Steve that later said his father was responsible for her death and many others. George apparently would come back to the States often under the radar, like nobody knew he was actually in, and Steve writes about this. He believes that he would come back and he would kill and leave again. I'm thinking maybe it was that, or maybe he would come and be like, get anxious, like they're onto me, they're gonna find me, and then he would flee again, and he just knew like he could never stay in the States long enough because he could potentially get caught. And obviously the police still kind of had a little bit of an inkling that it could have still be this doctor, because in 2013, soil in George's backyard was tested for remains, and it was tested positive. It came back positive. Wow. Of course, we don't know if or when this could have been, so it doesn't really give us much besides having a positive result, like something shady has been happening back there. But Steve has wrote a couple of books about his father, and some people just kind of blow him off. Like, they believe that he had it out for his father, didn't really have a good relationship with him, so not many actually credit him on any of this. And I don't know, I feel like the more and more research I did on this case, I could see where Steve was coming from with it. I have not personally read his books. I'm intrigued, don't get me wrong. I'm a bookworm, so I am intrigued, but I don't know if I could go as far to say that, I feel like, personally, I do think it was George. I don't understand why he would have fled the country if it wasn't him. Like, that type of ordeal doesn't really add up. And at that time, like, who would be, like, what random person on the street is going to, or possible murderer in that area is going to have everything they need to surgically do the things that they did with her? And the fact that they were linked together, she had been spotted at his place, like, it just doesn't really all add up. And he was a doctor, a rich one at that, and I could believe if it was the case that he was paying off somebody. Shit like that happens. It has to. November 24th, my birthday, way before I was born, in 1950, a woman named Christine Reynolds is a mom of 3, and she called in and confessed to the murder. She was actually the 27th person to date that confessed to this actual murder. I'll never understand the satisfaction of wanting people to think that you are the murderer. I don't understand that. The only difference with her story was that she confessed to have many Hollywood relationships, and that Elizabeth was moving in with her at the time of her death. She said that she knew her as Libby, and that they had met at a bar in Hollywood 3 years ago. She said they had a secret love affair that they kept hush-hush because it was in the 50s, so at that time, I mean, things were a lot more, like, you couldn't just be who you wanted to be, you couldn't love who you wanted to love without a lot more, I don't know, these days. I feel like this could be the 1950s for all I know. She told him that she was drunk and mad that Elizabeth was running around with other women. She was a little jealous, and she found her at the bar with a woman named Louise that night. They got into an argument that ended with them heading home together, and things got heated, and in the car, Christine leaned over and grabbed and choked Elizabeth. But Elizabeth fought back. She was able to break free and get out of the car and run. Christine went after her and got Elizabeth in a chokehold from behind and remembered she had a knife with her. I don't know how you have a knife on, you're holding a knife, but you also can get somebody in a chokehold like that, especially if they're like around like the same size or whatever, and Elizabeth is like fighting. It's a little weird. But she said after that, she doesn't remember anything. She doesn't remember the rest at all. It was like she just blacked out. Besides stating that she thinks she stabbed her repeatedly and left her there on the side of the road, which none of that adds up. I mean, Elizabeth was found on the side of the road, but there was no trace of blood there. That wasn't the crime scene. That's not where it happened. And, okay, she said it wasn't a pocket knife. It was like an actual knife, and I don't know why you're just carrying that around everywhere with you. But I don't see that really being able to just right there on next to the sidewalk saw somebody open. I just don't see that. Police didn't find her credible either, besides one detail that Christine said that wasn't public info at this time. They had not released every detail because at this point in this case, although it was going cold, it wasn't officially a cold case yet, and they really were trying to find who did this, so they of course weren't going to let out every little detail to the public. And this one, they didn't. She said that she had cut some of her, and I quote, damn hair off and shoved it up her fucking pussy. A sentence I never thought I would say. Though she wasn't that credible in a lot of ways, they knew she had to know something. His hair was actually, in fact, put into Elizabeth's vagina. So they confronted her and they say that they know she's lying and that, you know, not everything adds up, but they want to know what she does know, and she finally breaks down. She starts crying and eventually confessed that she was dating a woman at the PD who fed her all of the case details. It was such a huge time waster for the police and the effort that they were putting forth in this case at the time. And when asked why she wasted their time, she said she felt guilty because at the time of the same day of the murder, so the same day that Elizabeth supposedly died, she said that she woke up to having blood all over her clothes and shoes. She had no memory of what had happened the night before, and she had went to the police with her bloody clothes and told them, like, I don't know what I did. I did something, but I don't know what I did. But they didn't take her seriously at the time. You're telling me a woman that's bloody, all of her clothes are bloody, her shoes are bloody, and she's not injured whatsoever, and she comes in and says, I can't remember what I did last night, and you're just going to be like, that's your problem? Mentally, it was draining for her, and she had to put on the show again to be able to confess to them again. Like, I need you to take me seriously. Like, I woke up and I had all this blood on me. But police left it at that, so we'll never know what type of involvement she had with this case, if she did at all, or who, in fact, she actually hurt that night. Maybe she knows by now. They never even questioned the cop at the PD that fed her all this info either, which I feel like is bullshit. Like, that cop should have been, like, let go at that point, charged for, like, that's, I mean, it's not tampering with evidence, but that's, like, letting, like, credible stuff out to the public. In 1950, a sketch was also sent to the PD in North Carolina of a man with words that said, Dahlia Killer. Look this man up. It was forwarded to the LAPD, and it looked a lot like the Dr. George. Though this is a cold case to this day, the police still question if it was George or even a killer from Cleveland, Ohio. You may have heard about him. There were murders being committed there in Cleveland, Ohio, right before Elizabeth's. This serial killer was known as the Cleveland Torso Killer that cut his victims the same way Elizabeth was. He was said to have moved out west, so some believe she was his final victim. There's also the theory of the bellhop boy. Apparently he was a mortician assistant, which would make sense with how her body was found. There was bellhops who were apparently robbing people, and maybe one went further than that, and that was at the Biltmore Hotel downtown LA, where it was possibly one of her last sightings before her death. Last bit that I have for you on George Hodel, the doctor, is that he obtained a degree in psychiatry and counseled prisoners in the territorial prison in Hawaii for 3 years. Then moved to the Philippines, where he started a new family and appears to have remained until 1990, finally dying in 1999 in San Francisco without charges ever being filed. So if he was the killer, he got off scot-free his entire life for this. I guess besides constantly being anxious and fleeing the country, but if it was him, how many other people were also hurt, killed in the process? I feel like you guys know how I feel, and that I feel like there is a lot of concrete evidence that shows that this Dr. George Hodel had something to do with Elizabeth Short's death. We'll never know for certain, unfortunately, and I wish that there was more to it, or that there was more evidence to prove that it was him. But I did do some digging on some like forums and stuff for like what other people were saying about this case, because that's why I always say you can always message me and let me know your take, or comment on the post and let me know, what you think of this certain, person or case. But I thought for the episodes, it would be really fun towards the end to kind of like go over other people's thoughts, theories, that type of ordeal. So I have just a few. So somebody said that Elizabeth wasn't just cut in half, she was surgically bisected, and George Hodel was the only doctor in the area that could do that kind of procedure. The way that it was done, and they also mentioned the fact that he knew Elizabeth. They also included that the surveillance footage that was found showing Elizabeth leaving a hotel with the man matching the description of George the night before she disappeared was also in evidence. I tried looking this up and I didn't really see anything that was like valid on this, so this could just be a theory. I personally have not seen this footage, so I can't really say that that is true or false. But I have not seen anything about it with all of the research that I have done pouring into this, but I seen it and I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. But the next one that I have is the story goes so deep. George Hodel's daughter turned into a monster and put her own children through absolute torture, who have now come out to speak about atrocities that they were subject to and what it was like living in a family riddled with dark secrets. Apparently, their podcast is on Spotify and it's called Heart-Wrenching. I don't know if they just meant like this is really heart-wrenching or if that's actually what the podcast is called, but I definitely want to check that out for future reference. I honestly feel like this George Hodel could have like a whole episode about how just fucked up that whole family was, and just goes to show how far childhood trauma and abuse goes in a family and how it just continues on down generations. But either way, this whole case, I've seen so many documentaries, YouTubers, podcasters talk about this, and I kind of just wanted to compile everything together and research this case as much as possible, so there was quite a lot to go through. But yeah, from her childhood of a father who fakes his own death all the way to what tragically happens to her, it's just so awful. And the last one that I have from somebody was just noting the fact that the tic-tac-toe on her, it was a full played game. So who was playing tic-tac-toe? Was he forcing her to play with him? Or was it two suspects? Were two people playing tic-tac-toe on her body? Either way, it's fucked up, but like, leads you to think, is it two people? Is it more than just one suspect? I also want to know, like, I get like the suburb wasn't as full at that time. There wasn't as many houses as there is now, but like, nobody's seen somebody placing her body and posing her body. There's a lot of questions with this one. I feel like there's going to be a lot of questions with most of the episodes this season, so we're going to get through this together, though. We're going to talk about a lot of deep, dark, cold cases that keep me up at night and wondering, why has this not been solved? How could there not just be like a little detail? You hear about these cases all the time that have like this small little detail that solves the case, and it's like, why not these two? That's sad. If you're listening on the podcast and you want to have some visuals, if you want to see the beautiful Elizabeth Short, I will include them in the blog today, as well as maybe some area shots. I don't like to be super explicit image-wise on my blog out of respect for the family and the victims in general. I will sometimes include crime scene photos if they're not actual explicit of the victim, but unfortunately those are on Google, so there's that. It's very, very sad that that is like how she is remembered, but on my blog she will be remembered as the beautiful Elizabeth Short, who had dark black hair and piercing light green eyes. One thing I can say about this case being so popular and just so infamous is that her legend really has lived on, and that's what she always wanted to be, a legend at Hollywood, a star in Hollywood, and it's so tragic that this is how she's famous. But that whole circle moment there is very strange. It's very eerie. But yes, if you want to check out the blog's always linked down in the description. You can also find me on Instagram at Caffeine Crime Podcast. Let me know over there what you think about today's episode. If you have any other theories, if I did miss something in this case, there was so much to go through. If I ever did miss something, you can always let me know. And that's also what the blog is for. I like to update it with, hey, I forgot this in the episode. You know, if you want to check it out, here it is, that type of ordeal, but photos and stuff like that will be there as well. And besides that, thank you for listening or watching such a long episode. It is season 7 of Caffeine and Crime, and I'm so excited to kickstart this season, and I just appreciate you guys so much. I know there's been a big pause between the last season and this one, so just thank you so much for tuning back in and listening, or if you're new here, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope you stick around, subscribe to the YouTube or the podcast, whatever you're listening or watching on. I love to have you here, and if you ever, again, want to reach out or talk about a case, you can always find me over on Instagram at Caffeine Crime Podcast. Thanks for tuning in on this first episode of Season 7. I can't wait to be back next week with Episode 2.